Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I mean, amazing how so far in today's sessions I've heard, the talk of the need for collaboration, collaborative delivery, and obviously lots of conversations about data and technologies that can capture data, process data to allow decisions. What I'm going to be talking about today, though, is how do we unpick that a little bit in the next 10 minutes? And actually, there's a few challenges that we need to be asking ourselves to ensure that we do get the real value from data, and that the metrics that our platforms and digital technologies pump out is indeed going to create value for us all at the end of the day. Sorry, there we go. So yeah, I mean, Prakash made a quick introduction. I mean, so I'm the growth officer, chief growth officer for Asite, Platform Technologies. And prior to joining Asite, I was actually running the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, in Americas, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I've been based here in the Middle East now for over 30 years. Reason that's relevant is that RICS themselves were a standards body. They produce standards that guide the built environment, and many of those standards have now evolved to be data standards. So how do we ensure that our digital technologies and platforms do use data in a consistent way? The RICS, I used to talk to stakeholders all over the region, and a lot of time in Saudi with government, quasi-government, private sector stakeholders on the challenges that our sector faces. Of course, the ones you can see on the screen now are all too familiar with us. And some of them are quite striking. I mean, the one there about carbon emissions. Well, right now, we've got the COP26 conference happening in Glasgow in the UK. And of course, world leaders are talking about how do we collaborate to reach this net zero targets by 2050. And of course, we as built environment professionals have a real strong role to play in that, as do our digital technologies. So I think these are the challenges that we collectively need to overcome. And indeed, the uptake of technology is a principal one, which sort of then lends itself to the question, well, how simple are our technologies? How can we get better adoption and utilization? How can we drive collaborative delivery? And I think it's fair to say that our sector, and when we say sector, I'm talking about the life cycle of a built asset, is still pretty much fragmented. It's very siloed. Where there's been very little data sharing. I think stakeholders individually have got quite good at capturing data, but sharing data in a collaborative manner, it's been a little bit slower to be adopted. But that is the only solution that will allow us to overcome some of those challenges that we saw on the previous slide. So really, what I'm advocating here is that, digital platforms must drive collaboration through open data sharing. And I think we've seen this evolution actually taking shape. Many companies have in the past adopted digital processes, digital technologies, but very much what I would class as point-based solutions, looking at how to overcome certain workflows and tasks. We're now seeing this migration to more of a common data environment. And on a previous session, they were looking at one of the biggest transformations that we may expect to see driven by technology. And I think BIM came out in the survey as the top one, followed by common data environment. What we are now seeing and where the sector is now heading is moving beyond the common data environment to one where multiple platforms or multiple systems, solutions are all enabled to be working as one in an ecosystem, all hosted on common platforms. And that's the real big transformation that we foresee over the coming years. And I think we're already seeing it. I mean, the success and need for data sharing is just seen all over the world. I mean, in many markets in the recent COVID crisis, we've seen how multiple sources of data, geospatial, individual, mobile data is all combining to produce certain applications. This was the trace and track system from some of the European countries. You know, how do we manage our smart cities? We're going to need data to be combined and shared between geospatial, video cameras, social media, etc. And similarly in construction, as we've moved towards more off-site modular construction, you know, that's a real positive, but the potential downside could be it starts to fragment our sector even more and silo it. So again, it's so important that we get all stakeholders, wherever they may be working off a common platform, so that you get that golden thread of information, that single source of data truth. And, you know, we heard today quite a lot about digital twinning, you know, and I think our role as built environment professionals is not just looking at how do we build, but how do we manage assets moving forwards. And, you know, again, referring to COP26, a lot of governments are setting, you know, sustainability targets by 2050, or indeed in the case of Saudi, 2060, etc. You know, retrofitting assets. All this starts with having data on those assets. And when we think that 80% of the assets that are currently built today will still be utilized by 2050, then clearly we need to acquire a lot of data and share that data for the, you know, the objectives that you can see there, whether that's smart buildings, retrofitting, repurposing, or indeed digital twins. And again, I was on a conversation earlier that I heard about digital twins. What does that really mean? And yeah, there does need to be some definition on digital twins. And certainly what we talk about at Asite is dynamic digital twins. So that's real-time data coming from the buildings that allow informed decisions. And that's really the way that Asite's platform has been built. So rather than a point solution, we're acting as a collaboration platform that interfaces, pushes and pulls data with lots of other platforms out there. So we are truly creating an open data environment whereby all stakeholders at all stages of a project lifecycle will benefit from that single source of truth. However, to collaborate, though, we need a common language. Okay, and you know, BIM, as we've all talked about, has been around for years, but it was only when we started to get common languages when it comes to classifications, object nomenclature, did we start to see the real benefits of BIM. And now we're seeing, you know, similar approaches to digital information management for the built environment with ISO 19650. And again, today we've heard about some projects in KSA that are already now compliant with 19650 standards. So we do need a common language when it comes to buildings. And as we look to the future, you know, needless to say, the metrics that we will be reporting are changing. And clearly the ones on the screen now are probably top of the agenda. And as I said, very topical with COP26 going on at the moment. And it's all very easy for us to say, well, yes, these are the metrics that we need to be measuring. And this is the data we need to be capturing. But my challenge is, you know, are we doing it in a consistent way? Will that consistency then allow benchmarking? Because when we start benchmarking the performance of our construction assets or real, you know, as-built assets, that will impact on all sorts of other metrics, you know, asset costs, yields, ESG parameters, value, etc. And a little bit of a challenge for you. I'm going to ask you a question here. So, you know, we've got here, you know, have we really got that common language when it comes to data? And you know, if I ask you guys a question now, you know, we've got 3 buildings here on the screen with some metrics underneath them. And if I asked you, well, which building has the lower construction cost? And question 2, which building has the lower operational carbon footprint? Because this is going to be really relevant if we're going to then start benchmarking these assets. Yeah, and benchmarking will, as I said, have an impact on asset values. Now, if you're looking at those metrics now, I dare say you're all going to say, well, they're the same, they're equivalent. The reality is, though, we just don't know. Why don't we know? Because we are not adopting common standards. Our sector is a global sector. On this conference today, we have how many nationalities of engineers, technologists, project managers coming from all around the world. We look at the stakeholders operating in the Saudi markets, whether that be in the public and private sector, investors coming from all around the world. We are in a global sector, yet our standards are still very much local. And I've got the analogy there with football, and I always like to give this one. So, imagine if the rules of football in Saudi Arabia were slightly different to the rules of football in Germany, and the rules of football there were different to the rules of football in Brazil. Well, would football be any less popular in Saudi, Brazil, or Germany? And the answer is no. It's a great game. People love football. Could you have the World Cup if people are playing to different rules? And clearly the answer is no. And our sector is very similar. So at the moment, when we look at some very basic underpinning standards as how we measure a property, how we measure a building size, how we measure construction costs, total inconsistency, which is why on that previous slide, despite the reported sizes of the buildings being the same, the actual sizes could vary significantly. And if the actual sizes vary, the metrics surrounding carbon emissions also will vary significantly. Construction costs, people will include planning costs, land acquisition. Some projects don't. Yet we need to have that consistency. So, data is pivotal to making key decisions, but that data has to be of value, and it only is of value if we are capturing it, processing it, and using it in a consistent way. So my last slide is really, not only do we need to be considering the technologies that we're using for our projects and project delivery, but also then the actual foundational standards that underpin some of these technologies, or indeed the specifications that we're using on our projects. And the ones you can see on the screen now, these are international standards, international property measurement, international construction measurement, which covers life cycle costs and embodied carbon, international building operating standards, and all of those feed up into valuation. So there's a lot of work is being done with the global influences there that you see in driving that consistency. So I'm done there, but I want to leave you with a few questions as well as take your questions. And I think the questions on the slide are certainly questions that I would like you and your teams to be asking yourselves, on your projects that we are delivering, okay? And in the interest of time, I'll just leave them up on screen, but happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Rob. In terms of, I'm just looking to see if there's any questions come through on the thing. There's nothing coming. No, there are a few people typing, but there's nothing come through at the moment. So let's take one of the questions that you've got around sort of the collaborative approach to the digital delivery. How do you think your software really helps to enable that to happen?
So I mean, the Asite platform is, as I said, the way it's been developed is a collaborative platform. So first of all the stakeholders on a project, right from the ultimate client down through your project managers, your consultants, through the supply chain, your delivery partners, down to your designers, all of them can be working off one common platform. Through careful management of access and preferences, the concern about data ownership and sharing is dissipated, so that's managed. Mm-hmm. So by having everybody working on that common platform in real time is pivotal, so that everybody has the information in real time and that one source of the truth. The only way to achieve that is to collaborate also with other technology solutions out there. Asite doesn't want to be a BIM platform. There's mm-hmm. some great BIM platforms out there, but we want to be able to collaborate with them and push and pull data so that the clients and end users at the end of the day have access and visibility on that data without needing to be BIM experts themselves. Yeah. And that's just an example. And it's the same thing through the project life cycle, through the delivery stage and through the asset management stage by collaborating and acting as that, creating that ecosystem with other solutions out there is the way forwards for this industry.
Fantastic, thanks.